This is file 021. I'm opening it tonight because the ink is still dark where the witness pressed too hard, and because the tape spools tucked into the folder carry that salt bloom you only get when a case box rides the sea for a while, before someone decides it belongs on a shelf. Title reads, Bermuda Triangle Survivor Report. Encounter with non-human occupants. Location logged as the western boundary of the so-called triangle, somewhere between the shoals east of Florida and the deep lanes that slant toward Puerto Rico. Year recorded as 1976. The main witness is a United States Navy sonar technician named Elias Moreno, Petty Officer, bilingual, born to a fisherman on the Gulf and of a seamstress who swore the ocean has moods. Unit listed as a destroyer escort on a quiet signals run. Here masked as a routine transit so the crew would not ask more questions than the ocean was already asking them. Entities catalogued in the margin as unknown luminous craft, grid-like bioluminescence, acoustic shadows with velocity inconsistent with anything human, and an approach pattern suggestive of curiosity rather than hostility. Key details include missing time, a pressure drop felt bodily, rather than read on instruments, a voice heard without air, and the impression of being measured the way we measure tides. I will read this as it was told. I turn the recorder on and set the folder where my hand can keep it open. The pages crackle like old sails. The witness begins. I was raised to read the water before I could read a book, and I have never loved a steady horizon. The horizon is a promise you cannot keep. The closer you get, the more it runs. I did not join the Navy for the uniforms or the travel. I joined because the sea is the only thing that quiets the noise inside my head. That night, if I can call it a night given what happened to the clocks, I was at my station on a destroyer that I will not name, because the name does not matter the way the sound matters. We left Mayport under a sky the color of stamped metal, barometer steady, wind out of the east. The kind of uneventful departure that lets a crew turn lazy with small talk and card games and stories about home. The schedule said we would cut through the corner of the triangle because that is what you do when you are shaving hours off a crossing and you are not supposed to believe in lore. The chiefs do not say the word triangle. They say the box, or the corner, or the quiet lanes. The quiet is a lie. It is never quiet out there. It only sounds like it is, and that is worse. I went on a watch at what we logged as 2000 hours. In the book that means 8 in the evening, but we do not use that language on a ship. We talk in hours and bearings and ranges because you do not want poetry getting between you and what is really happening. My scope was clean. Surface scatter normal. Propeller songs where you expect them. The low hiss of the ocean moving over its own rocks. I tuned the gain down, then up, then down again. The way you do when you are telling yourself the gear is just a little out of true because the sea is busy that day. At about 21:30 by the quartermaster's note, the forward lookout called a pale smear off the port bow. He did not say light. He said smear, which is not a word we use for ships or planes. Smear belongs to storms and broken lamps and things you do not want to file a report on. I logged the call and swung the band, and there it was in my world too, a texture in the noise floor, like someone had shaved a thin line into a field of tall grass. It moved. Not fast, not slow, and not like a current. More like it chose a direction and expected the ocean to respect that choice. The officer of the deck wanted a range. I gave him a lie because the truth would have been silence. The truth was I could not make a solution for an object that refused to be a point. The smear widened. The topside watch said the water was showing a glow, faint and regular, a kind of grid if you squinted and looked from the corner of your eye. He said it like he was speaking through cotton, because the wind that had been steady all day had gone soft without dying. as if the world took a breath and did not let it out again. We slowed, officially for traffic, unofficially for nerves. In sonar, you can tell the difference between a hull cutting water and a fish mass or a cloud of shrimp. Sound has personality. This thing, this smear, had a manner. It made the ocean around it polite. The scatter tightened. The reverberation after our own pings came back thinner, like the room had been carpeted. At 2200 hours the grid brightened. No color I can name. It was the absence of dark rather than the presence of light, as if someone peeled the night back and showed you the primer underneath. The boatswain's mate, who was on his first long run, murmured something about runway lights under the water, and then laughed too quickly after he said it. Laughter is a spell we cast against the old stories, as if we can giggle the lore away. I do not know when the clocks failed. I know when I looked up and the minute hand on the bulkhead clock was not where it should have been. I know the ship's hum, the song only a sailor hears, dropped half a key. I know my own pulse slowed into a heavy, steady emphasis like a metronome in a church. A man behind me asked for permission to step out for air and did not wait for permission. He came back with his face wet and his voice small. There are sounds the ocean makes when it is about to bring you something it thinks you should meet. A whale sings across miles and you feel it in your teeth. A gale yells and the rigging answers. This was different. This was a not sound, the opposite of a bell. It took the edges off things. The coffee did not smell like coffee. The rubber mat under my boots did not squeak when I shifted my weight. Even the paper under my hand went quiet. I heard them before I saw them. I did not hear voices the way you hear a man talking with a throat and a tongue. I heard my name in the way the ocean speaks a word it has learned from the sailors who feed it their sweat and their dead. My name, slow, with the vowels unspooled, as if a tide were running through it. It did not come from left or right. It came from everywhere. I did not answer with my mouth. I thought, who is calling me? Like you think when your mother says your name and you are not sure if you are in trouble. Permission to speak freely is a formality that belongs to rooms with doors. I said it anyway. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted, came the reply, and I told the officer of the deck that the contact did not behave like a contact and that the ocean was telling me my name. He stared at me the way you look at a man who has been under too long, and then the smear sharpened into edges, and I was not a fool anymore. We saw shapes under the grid, not fish, not metal. The lines of them would not hold, as if the water could not remember their exact outline long enough to pass it along. They were not big, not small, not any size that matters when size is a land habit. They moved as if movement were a decision shared by many parts at once. Imagine a school of fish agreeing on a dance and then changing the steps without breaking time. The grid flexed around them like a muscle. The helm complained that we were drifting though the sea was calm. The chart room said our position shifted a hair's breadth and then shifted back without any correction. The radar spoke in half-truths, giving us ghosts of weather and ghosts of our own mast. A man at the stern saw a shape rise and then flatten like a breath against glass. He said it smelled like lightning had been drained of its anger. The first time they touched the hull, we heard it as a finger drawn along a wine-glass rim. Not scraping, not impact. A song that made the metal remember it had been ore and stone. Every plate in the ship answered at its own pitch. I put my hand flat on the bulkhead and felt a language in the vibrations. Staccato, then sustained, then a pause that lasted longer than comfort and shorter than fear. The pattern came again. I thought of the way we send pings into the black and listen for who we are in the echoes. This felt like someone else was telling us who we sounded like to them. I spoke back. I should not have. Doctrine says you do not invite. You do not encourage. You do not volunteer your name to a thing that has not given you its own. But the ocean had already said my name, and the ship had already answered with its bones, and I have never been good at being a passenger in my own life. I laid my palm against the wall and tapped a rhythm I learned as a boy when my father taught me how to call bait fish to the surface with the hull of a skiff. 3 short, 1 long, a silence, then 3 again. The ship carried it like a secret up through the stanchions and into the water. The grid brightened along one edge and dimmed along another. The smear became a field. The field became a door. I wish I had a better word, but door is what it was. Not a rectangle, not a hatch, a willingness to permit passage. My stomach tipped as if the deck had heaved under me, but the deck did not move. Men grip for handholds anyway because the body believes what its inner ear tells it, even when the eyes call it a liar. Someone shouted that the horizon had folded. Another said the stars had gone out and then come back in a different order. The navigator made a sound I had only ever heard during drills, when the instructors tried to scare us straight. Then the not sound deepened until it felt like the ocean was humming inside our blood, and the lights on the mess deck flickered and steadied with a new idea of steadiness. I saw them on the starboard side through the scuttle, shapes gliding between the ribs of the grid like birds through lattice. They were not gray, not silver. They were the color of the pause between notes. Limbs or no limbs is the wrong question. They had articulation where articulation was useful, and flow where flow was wiser. One turned what I will call a face toward the hull. I knew it was a face because I felt the weight of its attention the way you feel the sun on your skin with your eyes closed. It said my name again. This time it was in the air as well as in the water. The air gathered itself into my name and let it go like a wave topping and falling. I said, in my head because my mouth had forgotten its jobs, that I was a petty officer and that I was at my station, and that we did not mean harm. The shape answered, not in words, but in a sensation of being inspected for bruises by a careful hand. It was not cruel. It was not kind. It was precise. On the bridge, a man crossed himself. Another held his dog tags the way you hold a coin you are not sure you should spend. I thought of my mother's kitchen and the way she would hum to sourdough to wake it up. And I thought of my father's hands smelling of diesel and fish scales. And for a moment I was a child, and the ocean was a story that ended with everyone at the table and bread, still warm enough to steam. The officer of the deck ordered a turn to port to ease us away. The rudder laid over, and the bow agreed. But the rest of the ship did not. We were moving in 2 conversations at once, the one we had with physics and the one we had with whatever had decided we were interesting. The screws turned. The wake behaved like a proper wake. The wake also unbehaved in a second layer I could see only if I unfocused my eyes, running crosswise like a loom being threaded by an impatient grandmother. The first absence of time happened then. I know because I looked at the clock and the hands were in one place. And then, a breath later, they were in a place that made no sense for the number of heartbeats between. The deck watch later swore he smoked half a cigarette without the tip burning down at all. And then when he blinked, it had burned to the filter and singed his glove. A bosun remembered tying a knot that was halfway done forever, until suddenly it was finished and his fingers were in the air with nothing left to hold. My station filled with the smell of ozone and rain on hot pavement, though we were at sea and the sky had not broken. The grid began to pulse. It did not speed up or slow down. It changed the shape of its regularity, the way a drummer will stay in time but cut the beat into different measures. I listened with my hands and with my sternum. I felt my own name set aside and replaced by the name of the ship, and then by something else we were to them. Not prey, not peer, passenger perhaps, or specimen, or guest. The words all fail because the feeling did not have sharp edges. I asked in my head what they wanted. The answer felt like a mirror turned toward me. Not a glass mirror, a water mirror, You know how a pond will show you your face, and your face will tremble even if you are being very still. It was like that. It was my name poured into a mold, and then the mold lifted, and the name held its shape made of air. They wanted to know what we were like when the ocean was quiet in us. It is hard to describe quiet to someone who has made a career out of noise. They touched my sense of balance and my sense of taste, and the ache in my knee from a ladder I fell from when I was a dumb apprentice. And in all of those touches, there was one quality I have never felt from a human. I will call it patience that has never had to learn itself. Someone on the bow threw up neatly over the side and then apologized to the sea. A chief who had not apologized to anyone in years said sorry out loud to whoever was listening. The captain said nothing, because command is a kind of prayer you do not speak until you must. The not sound changed key again. It made my teeth throb. It made the ship hum in sympathy. The grid flared once as if something behind it had smiled or winced, or both. The shape closest to us pressed what I will call a hand against the hull. The metal did not dent. The paint did not mark. But the steel told me we had been touched. I cannot explain how a metal tells you anything unless you have worked with it as long as I have. Steel is like a stubborn cousin. It does not want to remember anything. It does not have to. That night, it remembered. I suspect it will always remember. Then the door began to close. Not slam, not ease. It changed its mind about letting us see the inside of the ocean. The grid thinned to threads. The threads drifted like jellyfish bells, torn clean. The smear fell back into the noise floor the way a dream falls back into day when you smell coffee and bacon, and the radio turns on with the news. The clocks found their nerve and began keeping proper time as if nothing had happened between one heartbeat and the next. The officer of the deck looked at me, and I looked at the scope. And the scope looked like a scope again. Men on the bridge breathed like men who had been underwater and broken surface at last. The smell of ozone left as if it had somewhere else to be. The wake played by the rules. The wind remembered how to be a wind instead of a lack. Over the side, the sea resumed its habit of being only itself, or at least pretending better. I made my log entry with a hand that did not shake and a pen that behaved. I wrote facts on a line and kept them factual long enough to make them less frightened. Then I wrote a sentence my chief would strike if he ever saw it, so I tucked it into my pocket copy instead of the book. I wrote, "They were not what we fear, and they were not what we hope. They were what waits when we finally stop telling the ocean what it is and let it introduce itself." The air never felt quite right after that moment. You could breathe it in and it would fill your chest, but it tasted thin, like soup made with bones that had already been boiled dry. Men shifted on their feet, scratching at collars as if the atmosphere itself had shrunk half a size too small. No one said what we all felt, that the sea had not finished with us. The silence was only intermission. The captain ordered normal speed resumed, and the engines obeyed. But I could feel the vibration through the deck plating drag its heels, like a mule that knows the trail ahead runs through fire. The ship was moving, yet every sense in me said we were idling in place, waiting for a hand to pull us forward. I had to keep touching my own watch to remind myself the hands were ticking again. Time was working, but it felt like a puppet performance. Convincing until you looked too long at the strings. Around what should have been 2,300 hours, the temperature dropped, not the measured kind. Thermometers in engineering stayed steady. This was skin knowledge. Every man topside drew his jackets closer, even those too proud to show weakness. I rubbed my forearm and found gooseflesh despite the Florida current running warm beneath us. It was as if the ocean had placed us inside its own memory of winter. Then came the lights. Not above, not below, but all around. First faint glimmers, sparks darting in the periphery of vision, like fireflies lost over open water. Then strands, weaving in arcs and spirals, crossing one another in patterns too intentional to be random. They were not phosphorescent plankton, though men tried to name them, that with quick mutters, hoping the familiar word might tame the sight. These things bent and rebent themselves with purpose, lines of geometry flaring against the night, sketching symbols across the waves. The helmsman reported instruments skewing again, compass needles trembling, gyro winking false bearings. The navigator plotted our position against the stars, then frowned, rubbed his eyes, and plotted again. He said the sky looked like the right sky, but not in the right place. Stars were present, constellations whole, yet the alignments were off by degrees that should never shift in a single night. His jaw worked the way a man's jaw does when he knows he cannot afford to believe what he sees. I turned back to sonar. The ocean had gone hollow. No merchant screws, no distant freighters, no whale song rolling under the keel. Only us in a chamber that swallowed all other voices. The smear was gone, yet its echo remained like heat left in metal long after the forge is dark. My own pings returned slower, dragged, as if the sea had grown deeper in every direction. Then the voice came again. Not mine this time, not my name. It spoke the ship's designation in tones drawn out and resonant, syllables stretched until they trembled like ropes under tension. Everyone who heard it froze. Even the captain's hand, steady as carved oak, stopped halfway to his cap brim. To hear a vessel called by name, not from a signal lamp or radio, but from the water itself, is enough to make a man reconsider every oath he has ever sworn. I braced myself against the console, ready for the grid to flare open again. But instead a shape surfaced on the starboard side, not breaking water, not disturbing it at all. The ocean rose to receive it like silk pulled over a form beneath. A dome, perhaps, or an oval. The mind kept trying to fit it into geometry it could not hold. The lights flickered along its skin and latticework, spirals chasing spirals until the eye lost count. Someone whispered the word, craft. Another said living. Neither was wrong, neither was right. The dome paced us, no propellers, no wake. Just an effortless slide through black water, its glow reflecting faintly on our own hull. I strained to capture it in sound, but the scope offered only the absence, a silence wrapped too tight to let echoes breathe. I felt then the pressure, not water pressing metal, not the depth-charge thud we trained to fear. This was inside pressure, as if my own skull had become a chamber under inspection. Thoughts slowed. Memories rose uninvited. The taste of blood from a split lip when I was 12. The sting of diesel on my father's fishing boat. The trembling smile of a girl I left at the dock when I signed papers. Each one surfaced raw, as if fingers sifted through me for items of interest. I wanted to resist, to throw up barriers, but the effort was like trying to keep tidewater from finding cracks in stone. Every man on watch was breathing shallow, pupils wide, faces lit by nothing but what swam outside. One sailor fell to his knees, clutching his dog tags, mouthing prayers too fast for meaning. Another gripped the bridge rail so hard blood welled where his nails tore skin. The dome shifted. What had been surface became entrance. A seam opened, though no water rushed in. Behind that seam was not cabin, not machinery, but a glow like deep coral, slow pulses throbbing in unison as if a single heart beat through many walls. We should have run. We should have poured on speed, radioed Mayport, filled the log with safe lies. But the engines would not answer. They turned, yes. Gauges read power flowing, but the ship belonged to them now. We were no longer passengers of steel. We were passengers of whatever intelligence had drawn near. And then it happened. The deck beneath my boots dissolved into absence. Not gone, absence. One blink I stood in sonar, the next I floated where there was no above, no below. Men around me gasped, their voices muffled like cries underwater, yet we did not drown. Breath continued, though lungs fought to believe it. The dome was gone, the ship gone. Only light lattices arced endlessly, folding back on themselves, corridors built of living geometry. Shapes moved within, not bodies, but impressions of bodies, the way a heat mirage suggests a figure crossing sand. They studied us without eyes, held us without hands. I felt myself weighed, measured, catalogued, no malice, no welcome. A neutral curiosity, so vast it shrank my humanity to the size of plankton. I heard a question without words, not directed, only at me, at all of us at once. The question was not, "What are you?" but "Why are you?" Why do you persist? Why do you continue when the tide runs against you? It pressed into bone marrow, into the ache behind my eyes, until all I could summon was my father's voice, telling me to keep hauling nets even when they came up empty. Persistence, I thought, because to stop is to die. The response rippled. Not approval, not disapproval, only acknowledgement. Like a teacher who hears a child recite and marks the sound without judgment. One sailor screamed then, unable to contain the pressure in his head. The sound cracked the stillness. The lattice quivered. The shapes paused. For an instant I feared they would crush us, as easily as we crush insects that scuttle too fast across our tables. Instead, the pressure released. The light dimmed. I fell, not into water, not onto deck, but into myself. When vision steadied, I was again at my station. The clock ticked. The deck hummed. Men stumbled back to posts, some weeping, some silent, all pale as ghosts. The dome outside receded, its glow fading like lanterns carried farther into fog. The captain gave no order for pursuit. He did not even lift binoculars. He simply stood, cap in hand, eyes fixed on the dark where light had been. His silence was the kind that cannot be broken without shattering men's souls. So we held our tongues, each of us storing what we had witnessed in the only vaults available, our own minds. We resumed course. Instruments steadied. The ocean remembered how to behave. Yet I knew, we all knew, that a ledger had been opened in some alien script, and our names inscribed not in ink but in the memory of something older than nations. The sea pretended not to remember, and that was the kindest lie it could offer. Swells resumed their old breathing, wind found its rhythm along the rails, and the ship's own pulse returned to the steady through line every sailor learns to trust. But trust is a rope you check with your hands after every storm, and all our hands kept checking. Men brushed the bulkheads as they passed, as if the steel might answer a private question. I took inventory of what the ocean had left inside me, a dull ache behind the eyes, as if I had stared too hard into bright snow. A taste like copper chased by rain. A slow, deep quiet lodged in the chest, the sort divers bring back from the bottom and nurse for days. I cycled through the console checks by habit, fingers moving faster than thought. Gain, filter, bearing sweep, gain again. Everything worked, and none of it felt normal. Topside, the bow watch called that the water ahead was glassy in patches, as if oil had been poured and then erased, leaving only the memory of sheen. The helmsman swore softly that the wheel responded before he touched it, a feather of cooperation that made him more afraid than any stiffness would have. The navigator kept checking the sky with a sextant that had never once betrayed him. He wrote numbers in grease pencil, then wiped them off with the heel of his hand and wrote them again, carving the doubt out of his own record. He said nothing out loud, but I watched the line of his shoulder and read the worry there. The captain gave the order to make a routine report. The radio carried our call signs with perfect clarity. The reply from shore stations came back with the crisp consonants of practiced calm. The quartermaster logged the times, and I watched his face change by degrees, as what the book said did not agree with what his gut knew. Later, when we all sat quiet with coffee gone cold in our hands, we would compare notes and discover that we had mislaid hours somewhere between the grid and the dome, and the not place where decks dissolve. No one felt those hours leave. No one had them to spend anymore. Time is a miser that sometimes steals without jingling its coins. I turned to the tape deck beside my console, the one that eats reels for breakfast and gives back long brown intestines that intelligence officers feast on back at base. I rewound to the first smear, ran forward through the quiet, then into the lattice where echoes should have been. The tape did not go blank. Worse, it sang in a way that no transducer should sing. A tone too pure to belong to ocean, threaded with a second tone that beat against the first until the hairs on my arms lifted. It was not a warning. It was not a welcome. It was a statement of fact in a language built from pressure and patience. I marked the reels with grease pencil and my initials, as procedure demands. Then I traced the label with a finger, as if I could press some part of what I remembered into the plastic to keep it from being taken away from me. The last time I felt that exact sensation was when my father sold a net I had mended myself, and I was not ready to watch another man pull fish from it. In the middle of those ordinary tasks, a single extraordinary thing happened that I have not yet set down because I do not know how to ask the paper to believe me. A small shape separated from the dark at the starboard quarter and drifted against our hull. Not a fish, not debris, not the jelly veils you sometimes see at night. It clung to paint without touching it, the way a shadow clings to a wall when the lamp is set just so. It pulsed, slow as sleep. I pressed my palm to the inside of the bulkhead opposite where it rested outside, and I felt that same pulse answer me through steel. It was not strong. It did not invade. It matched. As if to say, we hear your metronome. We have tuned to you as far as the metal will let us. I kept that to myself until later. Sailors do not pile wonder upon fear in the middle of a watch. We ration both, the way we ration sweet water. When we cleared the imaginary lines that men have drawn on charts and named with triangles to make the unknown feel domestic, the ocean resumed its honest noise. Tankers breathed their deep bass notes again beyond the horizon. A pod of dolphins stitched bright seams across our bow as if to sew us back into sense. The compass swung without jitters. The gyros hummed their amens. A chief boasted a story too loudly, just to prove voices carry normally in the old world. We let him. We laughed at the right places. We let the ship relearn our sounds. Sleep came to me in knots, not in rope. I lay in my rack and listened to the minute conversations that never stop aboard a living vessel. The creak of stowage, the sigh of ducting, the mouse talk of loose change in someone's pocket across the compartment. When I finally dropped under, the dream came clean and quick, like a line thrown true. In the dream, I stood on a beach my father used in the off-season to mend gear. The tide was low enough to expose the black bones of a reef where we were never allowed to wade. A door stood in the surf, made of nothing, hinged on the place where wave frill meets packed sand. It opened each time the water reached for it and closed when the water fell away, a courtesy exchanged between elements. Something stood on the far side and watched me. Not the lattice, not the dome. A patience-given shape. It did not speak. I woke with the urge to apologize and did not know for what. The next day we drilled as if to make the ship believe that drill was all there ever is. Fire, flood, man overboard, signal loss, steering casualty. The body loves rehearsals after an unrehearsed night. Men performed with clean movements and crisp shouts. The captain praised in measured words. Somewhere between stations, I caught two sailors, trading the quiet kind of rumor that never prints well in logs. One had a nosebleed that started and stopped with the pulses of light the previous night, he said. Another said his wristwatch had gained and lost minutes while sitting face down in his locker, and that when he strapped it back on his pulse fell into step with whatever time it wanted to keep. We traded those stories like contraband and did not pass them upward. When we tied up, base smelled like paint and coffee, and the laundry steam that clings to shore. Intelligence was waiting with the kind eyes they teach you before they teach you the hard ones. They wore uniforms that bore no ships and no salt, and they knew every sailor's full name and every sailor's first fear. They took the tapes and the logbooks and a portion of our voices. They led us in ones and twos into rooms designed to make you forget that other rooms exist. In my room, the chair was comfortable and the air too clean. A man whose hair had never learned to lie flat placed a recorder on this table and left it off. He asked for my account from the moment the forward lookout said smear to the moment we cleared the corner. I gave him the account twice. The first time I held to the grammar of instruments and procedures. The second time I told him my name was said by water and my thoughts were taken out and weighed and placed back into me, arranged by a hand that did not know what to do with human ache. He did not smile. He did not frown. He asked whether the grid had angles or curves. I said both, depending on how hard you tried to force it into one. He asked what the tone on the tape felt like inside bone. I said it did not hurt, but it made the idea of pain sharpen around the edges. He asked, last, what question I believed had been asked of us in that not place. I told him it was, why do you persist? He wrote nothing. He looked at the wall. He said thank you in a voice that meant more than manners, then told me to wait in the outer chair and drink the paper cup of water on the machine. The chief corpsman checked us all with the authority of a man who has seen too much and knows that most of it cannot be mended with bandages. Blood pressure, reflexes, eyes following light. He noted more than a few with slow blinks and shallow breath. He sent no one to sickbay. He sent us all to the pier with instructions to find horizon where it belongs and let it prove itself a straight line again. On the second evening in port, I walked alone to the seawall under a sky that held its stars as if wary they might fall. The tide ran out, carrying the smell of tar and mangrove roots. I stood there long enough for my feet to tell me the world was steady. Then the knot sound came, very faint, like memory remembered by a whisper. It was not in the air. It was in the stone, the way quarry rock keeps old thunder in its pores. It did not call my name. It offered a mirror again, and I saw my face the way a child sees it when he first learns a basin can be a looking glass. That is to say, I saw not my features, but my shape as a temporary answer to water's curiosity. Men from the destroyer met at the bar, where sailors have always invented new wars and new women to love and used the old words to describe them. We did not speak of lights or lattices. We did not speak of lost hours. We discussed food and cards and a comic in the paper that had finally killed off a character we pretended to hate. I told myself I was keeping faith with my oath and also with the silent pact I had with the ocean, which was to tell only the parts of its stories that do not bruise it. The tapes were copied and carried to rooms whose doors I will never pass. Word came down that weather had been blamed, and unusual refraction layers, and a training scenario conducted under multiple classifications that did not require sailors to know what sailors had seen. Men nodded because nodding keeps you in the warm place where pay finds your pocket and beds find your tired weight. I nodded too. But the nod was a boat on top of a current I could no longer ignore. Here is the last plain thing I can give you. When I returned to sea the next month, I learned to hear storms sooner than the forecasts, and I learned to trust a sound that instruments do not register. I could tell, by the thrum of plates and the pitch of screws, when depth shifts lay ahead like walls that had not yet risen. I could tell when whales were near before they sang. None of that belongs in a manual. All of it kept men safe. If that was a gift, I did not know I had earned it. If it was a consequence, I was willing to carry it the way a man carries an old scar that opens only when it rains. Sometimes, waking in the middle of an ordinary night in an ordinary rack, I would find the shape of that door in the dark between the light from the passageway and the lockers. It was not an invitation. It was a reminder that the ocean is older than our ships and more patient than our gods, and that there are neighbors whose kindness is measured not by gentleness, but by restraint. I do not know if they live under our charts or alongside them, or outside the idea of place altogether. I only know that for a handful of hours that cannot be counted, we were a specimen on a tray that was never cold and never warm, and that we were set back down without harm, because harm was not the lesson of that night. When the orders came to sign the papers that say you will not speak, I signed. I am speaking now because the ocean has had all of the years it wanted to see if I would. I am speaking because the sound of my own name held in water is a thing a man is allowed to record once, so that he does not drown in it later. I am speaking because the tapes do not sing anymore when I ask them to, and the only instrument left that still plays the piece is the one in my chest. There is one more detail. I kept it until now, not because it is grand, but because it is small. When we dry docked weeks after, a painter scraping along the starboard quarter found a patch where the old coats refused his blade. The paint there shimmered if you looked from the corner of the eye and showed nothing if you stared straight. He called me down with a laugh that said he wanted to share a weirdness, and I put my hand on the inside of the hull where that patch lay outside. The steel was cooler there, not cold, cool like a forehead with a fever passing. The yard crew sanded and primed and painted it clean, and the shimmer went away. But when that section of the hull flexed in heavy seas, it sang, very soft, the way porcelain sings when you wet your finger and circle the rim. I could always find it in the chorus of the ship. It was the voice I would have used if I had been made of steel and had to say to an ocean, "We heard you." That is how it ended for us. No grand finale, no beam drawing us skyward, no metal curling like paper. Just men in uniforms, walking down gangways with their sea bags, relieved and lonely in the same breath, and a ship that had learned a new note. I turned in my tapes and my notes, and my oath. I kept my name and my listening. On quiet mid-watches in later years, with other captains and other seas, I would set my palm to steel and wait. Most nights I felt nothing but the comfort of a big machine doing the work she was built to do. But once in a long while a pulse would answer from somewhere far down and far out, and the deck would hum a fraction sweeter, and I would think of a door hinged between wave and shore, opening and closing as a courtesy between worlds. This is the Echo 6 Archivist again. I am closing the file now. The folder smells of salt and paint and the old coffee of rooms where men try to name what they are not ready to know. Before I shelve it, I will leave you with this. If something vast and patient weighed us and chose restraint, what weight would we show if our roles reversed? And how would we sound when we finally remembered to listen first and name second?